This is MacVoices TV. Welcome to MacVoices TV. This is the Talk of the Mac community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. I'm happy to welcome back to MacVoices TV Mr. Jeff Gamet, the man who seems to be everywhere all at once. Jeff, it's good to have you back.
It's good to be here, and I am everywhere all at once, but that's only because I have the magic of technology.
So that makes you all-seeing, all-knowing, all-powerful.
All tired.
Yeah, yeah. I think that can be said for a lot of us, unfortunately. The more we try to master the technology, the worse it seems to get at times.
I think so. It's controlling us. And, it's kind of interesting doing a show like this where I have to kind of step out from the side of my microphone just a little bit.
Oh, yeah, because all of a sudden it is a little different, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's okay. Mix it up every now and then.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, this way people get to see you and understand just how much credibility you have.
Or they can wonder what I'm wearing right below the camera.
I wasn't going to go there, but I knew you would.
Someone had to.
Please don't tilt the camera.
Are you
Jeff,
sure?
Yeah, I'm very sure. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Jeff, the last time you joined us on the MacJury, you made a comment that I said we were going to follow up on, and then life intervened a little bit. And that is that you were adopting a Google-free lifestyle, which really surprised me. I've heard of plenty of people adopt a Microsoft-free lifestyle, but Google is so up and coming. Google is so hot. And of course, we've just come off of the Google I/O conference with some of the announcements. Why and how are you going Google free?
All right. So to be clear, I am using Google for web searches. I'm not using any Google apps on my Mac. And I chose to do that for a couple of reasons. And actually, these reasons all came up before I switched to a new computer. So a couple of them may not be appropriate anymore, but it's probably not going to change my mind. First, I did have performance issues with Google Earth and with Google Chrome. And then the actual interface for Google Chrome just really didn't do it for me at all. And I know that's totally subjective, which I think is okay, because if you like a web browser, great, use it. And if you don't like it, then don't use it. Find something else, which is what I did. And then the real big thing for me was the fact that Google's applications want to phone home, so to speak, and talk to the Google servers, and they're always doing their update checks, and that in and of itself is not a problem. The problem is that when I told the applications, do not do any auto update functions, they continue to check with the Google servers to see if updates are available. And I did not like that at all.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Does it bother you that they're just checking to see if updates are available and reporting it back to you? Or are they throwing up those annoying an update is available thing, or are they just doing it for their own sake?
Yeah, they're actually popping up dialogues telling me that I need to install the updates.
Oh, okay. That's
whatever updates are available. Yeah. And my feeling is when you say don't do update checks or don't do updates, auto updates, then the whole process of that update thing should not happen. And that includes the part where the application phones home and checks to see what version of an application is available. That's part of an update process. And when I say no, don't do it, that should mean don't do it. I like to have total control over when applications are doing their update thing. And I also like to know what happens to be eating my bandwidth at any given time, because I'm often doing things like this right now where we're recording a show And I want to make sure that all of the bandwidth that I have available to me really is available to me so that we get the best audio, we get the best video, and everything works the way we're expecting it to. If something is doing something in the background without my permission, especially when I expressly said, don't do it, well, that's a big problem for me.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I don't blame you. So what apps are we talking about? I mean, I guess Google has so much stuff out there. And most of it, though, I think many of our viewers are going to believe that it is in the cloud, that I'm accessing those services through my browser only. Now, you brought up Google Earth, which is obviously an app that lives on your Mac. What were you using that was doing this that really that pushed you over the edge?
Well, okay, so the Google applications, like actual real native macOS 10 applications that I had installed on my computer, Google Earth, Google Chrome, and Google SketchUp. And Google SketchUp is actually a really cool program. So when I made my across-the-board decision, the Google apps go because they're doing things without my permission, it kind of made me a little sad to get rid of Google SketchUp, but I made my decision and I'm sticking with it. Yeah, it just... Yeah, can you see the frustration on my face?
Well, I have to admit, I mean, I've adopted Gmail as my mail client or my mail entity. I use Google Calendar in conjunction with iCal, or BusyCal more accurately. Let's be accurate about that. I use Google Reader, certainly on my iDevices. So it would be a real big step for me to step away completely. But you make me feel a little better that it sounds like under your theory, I'd be still allowed to use those services. It's just the things that actually put native apps on my computer that would bother me.
Yeah, I'll accept that. And I actually have a Gmail account, and I'm using the Gmail service to filter messages from one of my other accounts. However, I don't go to the Google website to use the services. I have everything actually coming back into Mail app on my Mac. And which brings up another thing for me. I'm not a big fan of web apps. And I know Google has done some great things with the way their web apps work. But to me, a web browser is for surfing the web. It's not an application system in and of itself. I really don't like the idea of running other programs inside my web browser because you have a lot of limitations based on the fact that you're running in a web browser. And then you also have the inherent instability issues that come along with really any web browser. And the fact that no one can guarantee that you're going to have an always-on internet connection means that you have a higher likelihood of losing data at a very inopportune time than if you're using an application that runs natively on your computer.
And I agree with everything you just said, except the fact that with the proliferation of iDevices, I mean, the iPad, the iPhone have entered my life, and life is not the same. I find it very convenient and very useful to have certain things sitting out there, in this case, on Google's servers, through Google's services. Try to say that 3 times.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it means that I can be anywhere on any of my computers, or any of my devices, and as long as I have connectivity, I have access. Now, I know what I just said, as long as I have connectivity. Mailplane is what I'm using to access Gmail, though, and they do, along with some things that Google has done, there is an offline access method that you can store mail locally. So I even gave up on Apple Mail for that reason, just because it was so darn convenient to adopt Google's architecture. Maybe at some point I feel differently, but right now that really works very, very well.
You know, it's important that you find a system that works for you and then use that system. And it sounds like that's exactly what you've done. And I think that's great. Now, my system, since we're using the email example, I'll stick on that path for now. I use Mail, which is working fine for me. But part of that's because I've also thrown in a few extra plugins to Mail that add more features that make it work the way I want to. So I know for a lot of people, Mail is a very limited program, but I've been able to figure out how to make it work well for me. Then when I'm on the go, and I'm not around my Mac in my office, I have my iPad and my iPhone with me. And since I'm doing IMAP for email, I have all of those messages showing up just as if I was in front of my computer. So that system is working well for me.
So it sounds like you're just taking a different approach because you're using IMAP. You're still connecting to wherever you are centralizing your mail. And
right.
It's still, I don't want to say living in the cloud, but it's sort of managed in the cloud.
Yeah, to a degree. And it also adds in that extra level of what if I lose my internet connection? Because, of course, I'm having to rely on some sort of internet connection, whether it's a Wi-Fi network somewhere or 3G on my iPhone, to be able to access the information. And if I lose those connections, well, I can't get at the data.
Right. How about calendaring? Since we were talking about that as something that I definitely use. I don't know if you use a Google Calendar or not.
I have Google Calendar, and I use it for some very specific things. But my regular day-to-day calendaring activity actually happens with iCal, believe it or not. And I'm a MobileMe subscriber, so I'm using MobileMe for the whole syncing thing. And I know there's a lot of people that are probably right now going, "What? MobileMe? Really?" But when I put all the pieces together, it actually works really well for me because I just happen to be one of the lucky people where I don't have the syncing issues that a lot of other MobileMe users have. I'm not dealing with double entries in iCal. I'm not having multiple entries for the same contact show up in Address Book. It actually works as close to seamlessly as anything I've ever used. So I've got that going for me. And when I take into account the other things that I'm doing with Mail, having MobileMe in the mix actually works out really well for me. As an example, in Mail, I'm using Mail Tags, which is a great add-on for Mail that lets me add extra metadata to each of the messages that comes in. Plus, it gives me a direct link into iCal. So if I get an email message and I need to create an event based on that, then I can just actually build the event from the email, and the email itself will be attached as a hypertext link to the event in iCal. So I can create an event, assign the dates, the times, the categories, alarms, everything right in Mail with more horsepower than what the built-in build an event thing that Mail offers. It goes right off to my iCal database and then is immediately sent out to all of my other devices. And I add it, and I don't even have to think about it. It just works. And since I'm a OmniFocus user, I have the plugin for OmniFocus that lets me grab a message and create a task out of that. So taking Mail out of the mix and not being able to use those tools the way I do would be a big hindrance to my workflow.
It's always interesting to hear different people's workflows for the most common activities. Now, I'm using BusyCal. It is connected to MobileMe, and so I'm using that for all the syncing, but I'm also syncing my BusyCal with a Google Calendar, which is for my office, and that's a shared calendar. So for a little while, I was using another solution just because it worked, and it worked for years. Then when Apple made the recent change, it broke that, and I started using BusyCal's built-in Gmail, BusyCal's built-in Google syncing, and the transition was seamless. I knew what I wanted to do. There was great documentation on the website. I made the change, held my breath, made 5 backups, and went for it, and it was great. And I have not looked back. So, I'm with you. I'm not dealing with multiple entries. In fact, actually, I think it's a little bit easier now. I just don't get them. Everything seems to work pretty smoothly.
BusyCal's a really cool program, and I don't blame you for using it at all. The main reason I don't use BusyCal, and they may very well have addressed this issue, I could not attach Apple scripts to events as an alarm. And that's something that I actually do with iCal. So not being able to do that was sadly actually a showstopper for me.
I'll have to go back and look. I know that you could do that with iCal. I haven't had the need to do it that often. But I can see why it would be a showstopper, especially for what you do and the things you need to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, it's really nice to have an event where all of the things that need to happen on my computer before the event can be scripted in there. And then, like 5 or 10 minutes before a meeting, if I need to have specific applications with specific documents open, and maybe I need to have an email go out to someone, I can build all of that into an Apple script or an Automator action, and then just let iCal handle everything for me.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, we'll both go look at it after the show, and maybe do a follow-up at some point. But
yeah, and who knows? Maybe I'll need to try BusyCal again.
Yeah, and if I know John over at BusyCal, he's working on it now, because I know he doesn't like any feature left untouched.
Those guys are very thorough.
Yeah, they really are. Okay, so I also want to touch on Chrome. I'm really intrigued because I have a specific use for Chrome the way I have it set up as almost a separate web browsing environment for one purpose, and really one purpose only.
Is that for Flash?
No. Oh, good, Jeff. Thank you.
Sure.
No, actually, it's mainly as to access my work email, which I route through Gmail, and I like having that over there because then that's completely separate from my personal. I could do it in MailPlane using different accounts, but I just find it's very nice to have all my work activities, or as many as possible, sitting there in Chrome. I don't know. I'm one of those people that doesn't fall in love or out of love with the web browser when they round the corners or square the corners or use gray versus, a light steel color. As long as it works for me, it works. I do have to admit that I think the last version of Firefox got just a little busy, but that didn't mean I stopped using it. Yeah, well, yeah. But what bothered you so much about Chrome?
Well, the first issue I had with Chrome was the unified URL field and search field. And I know a lot of people really love that. So if that's one of the features that totally excites you about Chrome, great. Good for you. For me, not so much. I really like having my URL and search fields separate, because I know if I'm typing a URL and I know if I'm typing a search, and I don't need to have my web browser guessing and potentially routing everything that I do back through Google as a search, when instead what I really want to do is go straight to a web page. And anyhow, so that was an interface issue for me. Another problem that I have, and this is a problem with almost every web browser that's available on the market today, the tabbed browsing, where the tabs go across the top of the browser, or I guess it'd be more accurate to say horizontally in the browser, does not work for me, because I may have 15, 20, 30 browser tabs open in a single window. And each time you add in another tab, they get smaller, and like in Safari, they get smaller to a point, and then everything is in a fly-up menu off the side. And to me, that's a horrible interface, because you can't easily tell what each browser window is just by looking at its tab. So that was a big problem for me. Then when I realized that it was doing the phone home thing without my permission, then I thought, okay, yeah, this is this is simply not going to work for me. And then later on, I realized, well, what if you are on, say, a MiFi card, and you're doing some other things, and you don't have anything locked down in Chrome, so it's actually doing all of its updates in the background. Okay, you don't have control really over when that happens, so it will just start downloading whatever updates it has and then install those. If you're on a MiFi card and you have a limited amount of data bandwidth each month, do you really want Google just sucking that away to do Chrome updates without your knowledge?
See, now that is a great argument. I don't think there's anybody that could disagree with that. I'm a little surprised, as much as Google has been trying to focus on the mobile space, that they wouldn't have thought of that. But that is a great point. You could easily use up a huge chunk of your bandwidth and not even know it until it's gone.
You know, I bet they did think of that. And my guess is that the decision to try and make using the browser and getting updates as seamless and as easy as possible for most users meant that they chose to leave the browser the way it is instead of making it so that you have more control over exactly when it's doing updates. And I can see an argument for doing that, but it's not an argument that flies with me.
Right. Okay, so you've adopted this particular philosophy. So it sounds like you're not anti-Google. It's just there are things that don't work for you for some very good reasons.
Sure. Yeah, and you totally do a sensationalized headline for the podcast so people think that I'm like some anti-Google militant. That'll be great.
Well, they know you're militant. Just it's what day is it and what time is it?
Yeah, and what cause am I going after this hour?
Okay, so I have to ask, since we're having this Google discussion, let's just stay with it. Any reaction to the announcements out of the Google I/O conference, especially in light of some of your decisions?
All right, so the big announcement, I think, that came out of the Google I/O conference was the Chrome netbook. And the Chrome netbook, I look at it and I'm thinking, okay, so Google is on to something here that could potentially be a really cool thing. But I think they're doing it wrong. I don't know exactly what the right way to do it is, but I know that, at least from my perspective, they're doing it the wrong way right now. So the thing about the Chrome netbook is that you have a little laptop that is running Chrome OS, or the Chrome web browser, as an operating system. Well, we've already established how much I enjoy the Chrome web browser, so that's a problem for me right there. But putting that to the side, running all of your applications as web apps in a web browser operating system, to me, sounds like a big old bucket of headaches just waiting to happen. And you also have the whole cloud thing. See, I'm looking up for the cloud. I'm not seeing it in my office. Anyhow, the cloud thing that people have to deal with here, meaning your applications are web-based apps, your data is all stored as web data on cloud servers. That, to me, while it sounds great because you should be able to pick up any Chrome netbook and then have instant access to all of your data, it's also a problem because all of your data is now dependent on whether or not Google is maintaining its servers correctly so your data doesn't get lost, and that you have an internet connection. And I don't know about you, but a lot of the flights that I take, there are no internet connections on those flights. And if I'm having to work on projects in an airport, there are very few airports I've been in where I would feel comfortable relying on their Wi-Fi network because they tend to be slow, they tend to drop out intermittently, and that's not a good way for a computing experience to work, especially if you're doing critical business work where you have to have that connection. It's like, you remember the old days, Chuck, when we had dumb terminals? and they would connect back up to the server somewhere, and you had this really reliable machine sitting on your desk that was basically a display and a keyboard, and that was it. And it worked as long as the server worked, which was typically pretty much all the time. And it was very reliable. That's kind of what the whole Chrome netbook thing feels like to me, in that it's like they went the dumb terminal route and they cut the wires and replaced it with wireless technology. So they took all the reliability out that you get from a dumb terminal setup and still handed it to you as a dumb terminal.
I don't remember the old days quite as fondly as you do. Those were some of my first experiences with corporate IT, and the server was not always up, Jeff.
Okay, so I got lucky, and I was working at companies that apparently had better luck with their servers.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. I'm still intrigued by the fact that everybody is, Google is pushing the netbook model again. Now, if they revise the netbook to something that's a little bigger than what you and I know as a netbook, because it was the form factor and the power that just always struck me as making a netbook a poor decision. If they power these things properly, and if they can optimize enough of it so that even over slower Wi-Fi connections, you will have a decent experience, it may work. And, we still are waiting to see what Apple's going to do with their data center. So we could be back here next week saying, oh, isn't this a great model? But Apple seems to kind of figure out the user experience piece of this and why that is so important. That's the part. We haven't seen these out in the wild yet. It'll be very interesting to see how it goes. But all of a sudden, everybody wants me to move. Well, the music is the first thing. Amazon wants me to move my music to their cloud. Google now is saying, move it to our cloud. The rumor is that Apple is going to say, move it to our cloud.
Right.
Getting kind of cloudy out there, Jeff.
Yeah. I totally get why companies are pushing for this cloud thing, because once they get that, I don't want to call it control over our data, because I don't think it's so much about controlling our data. I think it's about branding and about taking the data that we have and finding ways that they can monetize what we already have. Because right now, if you take your data and you save it to your hard drive, okay, you've paid for the hard drive once, and that's it. And all of these companies want us to start paying for all of this over and over again, because that recurring payment model ultimately gets them more money than simply selling you a product once and then hoping you come back later the next time you need to buy a new version of it. So I think that's what a lot of this is about. Now, of course, the other side of that is we get the convenience of being able to access our data from anywhere we want. And if you buy into the whole web app thing, then you also get the benefit of your applications are available wherever you go. And you don't have to worry about whether or not you have the latest updates, because that's happening in the background. And it doesn't matter what you launched last time. It's always the newest version.
One other piece you haven't mentioned, and this is, call me paranoid, call me visionary, call me what you want, but I am just concerned that every time that I want to watch a movie or listen to a track of music, I'm using up bandwidth. And that's not Google's bandwidth. Well, I guess it can be construed that, but I'm paying a provider to give me that bandwidth. And so that means that, every time I want to listen to a classic Deep Purple album, I'm going to be using up a chunk of the bandwidth I'm paying, whether it's the bandwidth I'm paying for from AT&T, for me being mobile, whether it's the bandwidth I'm paying Comcast for at home. I'm chewing that up. And that worries me a bit. That's where you're going to take the bite, is right in the wallet for the bandwidth costs, not the storage, but the bandwidth.
I worry about that a lot too. Especially because most of the TV shows and movies that I watch are streamed. And just to be clear, I'm streaming legitimately. I'm not using any of the pirate services. So I'm getting content from Netflix all the time. That's actually where I watch the majority of the TV shows that I went to see. And then I'm well, like right now I have a season pass to Doctor Who, and really, who doesn't? But yeah, so every Sunday morning I'm downloading 2 files for Doctor Who, because it always downloads the high def version of the movie or the TV show, and then it downloads the standard def version as well. So I'm double downloading every Sunday morning just for that. Plus, if I'm watching some shows during the week that are streaming from Netflix, okay, that's chewing up a bunch of bandwidth. And then toss in a movie every now and then, okay, that's going to chew up a lot more bandwidth. And then toss in doing or watching, say, stuff on YouTube or any of the other online video services. A lot of people are using Hulu a lot. A lot of people are using Hulu a lot. Wow, that was horrible. And then don't forget podcasting, because we're creating big files and we're tossing those around too. All of that's going into the whole data cap thing that we're having to deal with. And like you, I have Comcast, and I know that there's that data cap in there, and I'm curious how long it's going to take before I'm busting over that every month.
It's part of the whole media strategy thing that we're all developing. And I guess right now the equation that I'm using is, if this is something that I think I'm going to enjoy or want to enjoy over and over, whether it's movies or music or whatever, I'm more inclined to keep it local or to buy a copy, put it on my hard drive, go through the backup procedures and all that. That just feels like it makes a little more sense to me. I don't have a problem using Hulu or Netflix, although I'm not a Netflix subscriber, but I go with the concept, but more Hulu to see things that are sort of those throwaway TV shows or movies that I'm going to want to watch this once, and that's going to be it. I'm probably never going to go back and see it again. And if I do, if I decide that I may want to watch this 4 or 5 times, then it makes sense to go and actually get a copy of one kind or another. So that's sort of my thinking. You're right, the podcasts, I mean, we all archive a few things, but for the most part, that's like current events. I listen to it once. I may go back and pull it for reference later, but for the most part, it's okay. I've listened to it once and I'm moving on. So that I don't have a problem using up my streaming. It's the repeat stuff that I'm a little concerned about, that I think that's where you have to really stop and think about how you watch, what you watch, how you listen to what you listen to, and figure out where it's going to be best served, not just now, but in the future as we all just routinely use up more bandwidth.
Oh, absolutely. If I found a show that I wanted to watch an episode or an entire season over and over, I would end up going out and probably buying the DVDs, or I'll end up wasting, well, not wasting, but chewing up more bandwidth by going to the iTunes store and purchasing the content and downloading it that way. And it's, we're in a situation now where we actually have to start thinking about the bandwidth we're using. And I don't want to say ration, but it's almost like we're to a point where we have to start thinking about rationing our bandwidth. And I know there's a lot of people out there that don't have to worry about that, but people like you and me and people that are real avid movie watchers and TV show watchers, this is something they're having to think about now, because there are these big video files that we're pushing through our internet connections, and that's going to be a problem at some point.
Well, it's one of the reasons that I like to try to deliver as much of the MacVoices TV content on MacVoices as well, the audio portion, so people do have a choice. If they want to come over and see us talk, that's great. If they just want to get the audio content, they can go there. But yeah, you're right. It costs me bandwidth to upload the show, and obviously that's just once. It costs you to download it. So depending on how I'm uploading it and where I'm uploading it to and how it's being converted, that can turn into quite a bit that you need to pay attention to. So I don't know that we're at the point of rationing. I just think it's time for a little bit of intelligent, maybe conservation or just contemplation about it.
Okay, I like that. Conservation. That sounds a lot better than rationing.
Yeah, I don't want people to think we're both paranoid about it, but it just is. It's something you need to think about.
Yes, and yeah, you're right. And I'm not actually paranoid about my bandwidth yet, but it's something that I have to be aware of now. And there was a time where I didn't need to be aware of how much bandwidth I was using. And to be fair, it's not like I was pushing so much data around that I was choking the internet connections in my area. But yeah, you didn't have to think about it. And now it's something that you need to keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah. Well, this has been interesting, Jeff, and I'm glad that, the comment, as I said at the outset, when you made that on the MacJury, it's like, what do you mean you're going Googleless? How does anybody in today's world go completely Googleless? So it's not that you're just kicking Google completely to the curb. It's just that you're adapting and making some intelligent decisions based on what they're doing with some of their services.
I think that's a great synopsis of what I'm doing.
I would expect you to do nothing less, Jeff. You always make intelligent decisions about everything.
Really? You really haven't hung out with me much at Mac, have you?
I'm selling it hard, Jeff. I'm selling it hard.
I mean, thanks, Chuck, for being so observant. Thank you.
Yeah, that's better. Come on.
Man, I totally blew that.
I'll see if I can fix that in post for you, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us and for coming back on MacVoices TV. I hope this won't be the last time. I hope we get to do it a lot more often.
Hey, thank you for having me on. And yeah, I'd love to come back. And this is cool. You're doing video stuff. I love it.
And I blew it. I want to make sure that you get a chance to plug everything because I know where you're from and most of the people know where you're from. But just in case they don't, you want to give us the quick rundown?
Oh, sure. I'm the managing editor for Mac Observer, so you can hop on over to macobserver.com and find me and a lot of other incredibly talented writers there. Then I do the We Have Communicators podcast that happens pretty much every week. Then the Apple Context Machine podcast, which happens on a semi-regular basis. And then several other podcasts, many of yours, Chuck, and always thank you for having me on. You can also find me on Twitter. That would be twitter.com/jgamet. And gee, Chuck, have I hit the big things?
I think so. I'll make sure I have links in the show notes to everything Jeff just mentioned. And if he forgot anything and I forgot it, I'll put it in the show notes too. That way you can be all Jeff all the time if you want to.
Because I'm sure that's what everyone really wants.
Yeah, that's one of their hidden aspirations, Jeff.
Yeah, well, I fear for tomorrow's youth.
Well, I do too, but not because of you. Not because of you. Folks, that's Jeff Gamet. Again, check the show notes for links to everything we talked about, to all the places you can find Jeff, and maybe you might even find some other things on MacVoices TV and the other shows of the MacVoices group you'll be interested in. Until the next time, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is the Talk of the Mac Community. Thanks for watching. MacVoices TV is part of the MacVoices group and a member of Mac Level 10.